Thank you. And always a pleasure to see you and to have this moment to have a conversation with you. And I hope I say this right. Koleeji.
Meji, yeah.
This is your, Yoruba language translation of Femi Osofisan's Kolera, Kolej, which was published in 1975. The often quoted critical synopsis of this book is by your compatriot, the late Adélékè, where he's referred to this book as a satirical novel which presents the comedy of politics that is brilliantly funny and reveals a penetrating insight into the human weaknesses that too often affect the conduct of public affairs. Underlying this satire, however, is a critical examination of African politics, a deeply serious concern of the state of the political and social condition of collective life on the continent. What is your description of this work, Professor Adélékè?
Actually, Professor Relay is always on point. He nailed the description of the book, but he was also the publisher of the novel. The book was first published in Relay's imprint, New Horn Press, when it was at Ibadan. He was a professor at Ibadan then. And Osofisan was his first PhD student at Ibadan. So when Osofisan, he supervised Osofisan's PhD studies in French. So there is a long relationship that's not in the book between Osofisan and Irele. And as I said, Irele caught it very well. The book, when you read it in the original, the book catches, you just wonder, why did he write this? But you get it. That to come back to your question, what's my own reading? It's the meta approach, the meta critical approach. It's a meta fiction, as it were, for me. That's what I found most compelling about the book. It's fiction about fiction, in that and that's what makes it funny, extremely funny. Locates political trouble, political miscalculations within a university campus. A university campus where we have most of our writers emerged, where you expect the regime of reason. You will expect reason to be the primary consideration in a university, the home of critical thought. In this Kolera Kolej, that is also a miniature country. It's actually a country that got its independence from mother country. That's the way it's described. All reason prevails from the beginning to the end. So the university that's supposed to be the home of reason became the nightclub of unreason all through the novel. That's what, it's so funny, the characters are, but it's so funny and also sad. You can compare it to Devil on the Cross, which is, Devil on the Cross is unreal. You see these characters making fabulous claims. They want to can air and then sell it to everybody. It's so sad, but also funny. But you look at Kolera Kolej, it's unbelievably funny. So it's meta-critical in that it points at the university, the home of writers and reason, both in English language and back to Yoruba language. The preceding Yoruba tradition of fiction writing also get rewritten, as it were. All those strange characters you find in standard Yoruba novels are now real people, but given names that are funny. There's one, Professor Tall, is very short. Professor Fat, he's very thin. There's Comrade Monkey. Now I'm translating it to Yoruba. It's actually something in the Yoruba, but it's Comrade Monkey in English. And they all fumble from one. It's crazy. The novel is crazy. I fell in love with it, and I've never been able to forget it.
It's interesting, Prof, that you start with the biography of the author and the relationship he had with a critic who was also his publisher. Take me through the biography of this project, of this translation project.
It's about a cholera epidemic that broke out in a university campus, and they did not know how to cure it. And everybody keeps falling dead and dying and dying. And you know, cholera, you just need a little vial to. Cholera is not a big disease in terms of when you're in a community of strange diseases. Kolera should not be big for a university campus to fix, but they were not able to fix it. It keeps killing people over and over. I've always had in mind of translating that book to Yoruba to go the other direction, because I think it's a Yoruba novel that's written in English. And COVID broke in 2020. We were all locked at home. And I happened to work on a university campus. And so, okay, this is Kolera Connect. Osofisan saw this in 1975. I said, look, let me make this a project for myself. So I went back to it in 20. I've done one chapter before. So when COVID broke, that's just time for me to go back and redo it and finish it. And the chair of my department then, the English department, asked me and some people to make recommendations on books we should be reading during COVID to give to students. And Kolera College is the one that is proper for this time, especially for university people. So that's why I went back to it. I sought the Osofisan's permission, and he wrote back and said, of all the books I've written, how come this is the one you want to do? The things I've done I'm not opposed to you. I give you my permission, but please explain to me why this book among all the things I have done. So that's why, and I explained to him that I really, really like the conscious attention to form, to narrative, how we stitch stories together from things that have happened before, and also the fact that it's funny, very, very funny. So that's the brief biography. Then I approached our friend, you know him, he did Professor, your book on Professor Mugo, Bookcraft, the publisher, Mr. Olayebi. Then I approached him and he said, sure, let's do it. And we did a bilingual edition because as a publisher, he knows if you want to sell that book in Nigeria, Yoruba alone may not do it. So we went back to Professor Osofisan. Can we do a bilingual? Will you give us permission to do a bilingual, Yoruba on one side, English on one side? He gave his blessings and said, let's do it. So that's why we were able to put that together.
Take me through, as a translator, what challenges did you face?
The main challenge for me was trying to reflect Osofisan's self-conscious literary use of Yoruba language and the English language in Yoruba. So how do I reflect the nuances, the allusions he's making? For example, there's one place in the book, one of the absurd characters refers to Yambo Wologwem's Bound to Violence. That's not the Yoruba book. So do I do that without putting a footnote? A footnote in Yoruba book? So that was a challenge, but I just put Wologwem in. I just wrote Wologwem as it is. I didn't translate. I just used that. There are some parts of the narrative, and actually I should say this. There are parts of the narrative to distinguish levels of English usage. So like pidgin English for domestic workers, low-level police officers, and military. You know that in African, especially in West African literary speech. How do you reflect that in Yoruba? How do you translate that to Yoruba? So what I did was, wherever they speak pidgin, I will use my own dialect of Yoruba, Ijebu. So there is standard Yoruba, which is the standard narrative that all Yoruba people do and read when they learn in school. There are regional Yoruba. So where there is pidgin, I will use my own regional version of Ijebu, which is, again, it's funny that I have to do that, but there's no pidgin Yoruba. So I have to do regional language to represent that. That was a challenge. Especially, I imagine that as a challenge for readers who do not speak Ijebu dialect of Yoruba, and then counter that. Then there is also poetry. Poetry in English, poetry that is not praise poetry, that is not ritual poetry. There's actually a poet character in the book. And this is a new kind of poetry in Yoruba. To translate that to Yoruba, it's a lot. Actually, I went online, I thanked some of them in the preface, to ask colleagues, how will you do this line in Yoruba? It's clear in English. It's contemplative. You know what it is, but to put that in Yoruba language is completely new way of writing poetry. So that's also another challenge that I had to face. But I tried my best. I hope others will take it up and do more of that kind of translation, of returning these things, these books, to following Ngugi and Akinshola. These books need to go back to their homes, their original homes.
What happens to that which resists translation?
You invent, you create it, you invent it. And there are many, you always encounter those as a translator. You invent it, you create it. Again, to go back to our older colleague, Professor Ngugi, nobody read the Bible in translation. Very few people ever read the Bible, has ever and will ever read the Bible in original. So we will always read in translations, and these are supposed to be words of God, that the Bible itself says you cannot add. Actually, it puts a curse on those who, if you add to it, or you take from it. There's a curse in the Bible about that. But every day in the translation, we keep taking from it and adding to it, because some parts resist translation. And we have to invent, and that's how language grows. I think that's how language grows. It's by resisting the untranslatable and then doing it there.
I was looking at some of the interviews you did around this book, and here's a quote from you. You said, "I do not think of Yoruba, both cultures and languages, as something done by the ancestors. I teach and write to meet those who call themselves Yoruba where they are now, in order to understand how people construct their being Yoruba and being in the world. It is in so doing, I believe, that the volume of mutual enrichment will multiply." Is English an African language?
Oh yeah, for me, yeah. English is. You see me quickly answering that? I have no doubt about that. For me, English is already an African language. Whether the British like it or they do not like it, it's already an African language. I'm on the Achebe side of that. It's an African language. I'm serious. You see me quickly answering? Yeah, I have no doubt in my mind. English is already an African language. I don't use indigenous language for it. I call them Afriphonic. That's what I use in my writing and in my classes. I call them Afriphonic. And English is an Afriphonic language as far as I'm concerned. Look, I get the example, you quoted my feeling on Yoruba when in that interview, because there's this lamentation every time that people are not Yoruba enough today, as if there was ever one way of being Yoruba. Does Fela sing in Yoruba? Yes, he did some. He did some in Pidgin. He also did some in English. You listen to Afro beats today, you see them bringing in one project I hope one day that I may be able to do finally is the new form of praise poetry in those songs, contemporary songs. Totally different from what we are told or what we learned in books as the standard form of praise poetry in Yoruba. But you listen to these new poets, I call new poets, in this Afrobeat song. I think praise poetry is great. They praise themselves, they praise their subjects, but in new ways. In totally new ways that the traditional in quote, the praise singers in the villages or in the smaller towns don't use, even although they are living at the same time. Those who sing Afrobeat in Lagos and those who do praise singing outside of Lagos, at the same time, they are doing different things, different ways of praising that unfortunately we do not pay attention to what's going on.
What surprised you the most once you were done with the translation?
First, let me speak of the challenges. It was getting a willing publisher to take it. Very, very few publishers that one would like. There are cash and carry, what you call cash and carry publishers all over. You find them in Lagos, you find them in Ibadan. They will publish quickly. But I was looking for a while, I was looking for university presses. It's a university-based novel. It's a campus novel. There are no university presses anymore, or real, genuine university presses at home. So finding a willing publisher was tough, who will not take money in advance before they take it from you, which I did not want to do. But fortunately, I got Bookcraft because they've been shown a long interest in publishing academic books, including novels. Then the second one, the second question about surprise, that I actually could do a book in Yoruba. That was a surprise for me. That I could do a book, the whole book in Yoruba language, although it's translated, was a pleasant surprise for me. Mm-hmm. And that led me to think of the next challenge, doing a full-length academic paper in Yoruba of my own that I'm not translating. That's the next, to write 20-page critical article in Yoruba, a book chapter. It's sad, honestly, it's sad. That's a major, I consider that a major achievement, that I'm able to write a whole book in Yoruba. It's sad. The commentary on the kind of education we've had.
Prof, what else would you want to tell me about this project that I have not asked you?
To respond to that, I want to refer again to what you said about the words I spoke in one of the interviews about meeting people or where they are. There's this lamentation every time among scholars and critics and writers too, that Afrophonic languages are not doing well. It's not going to do well if you don't do something about it. We have to meet the situation where it is. We need to keep. There's no debate. I'm not debating whether it's African writing. No, I'm not. I just want to see the records, the archives built. Languages don't thrive, don't survive unless they get translated into literature. But what I mean, I don't mean language, I mean get transformed. Languages live best. They never die there's a literary form, but there is a literary tradition in them. People say read Latin text today, even nobody speaks Latin. We go to those texts to check, to look. What does this word mean in that time? For me, that's one of the tragedies of many West African languages. And that's a project that I hope to take on with, our friend and colleague, Femi at Cornell, and Adélékè Adéẹ at Indiana, a Yoruba to Yoruba dictionary. The only one on record was done in 1957, which means that a lot of words used that did not get written down disappeared in the last 65 years. And before 1957, we do not know because they were not written down. It's always bilingual. Yoruba to English, English to Yoruba. So, and I think literature could be a major, writing in those languages, including translation, of documentation of how new words get into those languages and how those languages give to the tradition, the languages they interact with. For me, that's what I want to keep doing to the Yoruba to Yoruba dictionary. And 2, I'm going to do an Osofisan play next. I promise him that I will translate one of his plays into Yoruba, Once Upon 4 Robbers.
Before you go, Prof, I want you to tell me about this proverb you have as your signature about the
I know where you're going. If the needle could sew, it will have no hole on its back. There's a little story. I first encountered it in 1989. I was writing my dissertation at the University of Florida, and it's on proverbs and textuality and nativism in African literature. So I was looking for proverbs about proverbs. And I had there's this book by Richard Burton on West African language, West African proverbs, compiled, I think, 1853. There were some sections on Yoruba, sections on Akan, all translated to English. Then I saw this one from Akan, which is Akan language in Ghana. If the needle could sew, it will have no hole on its back. I was still studying. I'm still partial to deconstruction. So I said, oh my gosh, this is deconstruction in its purest form. This was recorded in 1853. If the needle could sew, but the needle could sew, we know that. So the very ability, the very hole on its back, the lack, which as it were, that enables the proverb to sew, to mend other holes. That same, we call it a lack, but it's also an ability. What enables the needle and other clothes does not apply to the needle itself. I found that fascinating, endlessly fascinating as a student of deconstruction and as a student of proverbs. I adopted in 1989. Since 1989, it's all I'm going to be using it. And I'm glad you asked that. People ask me every time.
Thank you for everything that you continued.
Hey.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks. Yeah. A pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much for doing this.